Good evening, everybody, at least those of you in North America. I know we have a couple of registrants, or at least one registrant from Australia. I don't know if you're on live or if you're going to be listening to the recording. Otherwise, good morning to you. My name is Michael Andrec. I'm the archivist at the Ukrainian History and Education Center in Somerset, New Jersey. Welcome to all of you. I know we have some returning folks who are longtime fans of ours who come to practically every event that we do. And I think we have some new people who have never attended one of our events. So I just wanted to talk a little bit before we get going about us, about the UHEC and what it is that we do. I also wanted to say that, we have Anastasiia Chapman from the Church World Service is here, and she will be talking a little bit later. And Michael Andrec, who's one of our Nashi Predki, our ancestors, committee members, is also here, who will be helping out with the Q&A. Just a bit of housekeeping. There is I believe both chat and Q&A available on your Zoom interface. If you have specific questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A. If you just want to chat with people or introduce yourself or something like that, you can use the chat functionality as well. So, hello, there we go. So who are we? We are the Ukrainian History and Education Center. We are located, again, roughly between New York and Philadelphia. We do a lot of public programming and exhibitions on Ukrainian history, art, and culture of Ukraine, Ukrainians, and Ukrainian Americans. We love to have researchers come and use our materials. We love to help scholars and students and educators with things related to Ukraine. We obviously preserve and provide access to our museum and archives collections, of which they are pretty substantial. And also we have one of the largest collections of Ukrainian recorded sound probably anywhere in the world. And this program is part of the series of Nashi Predki, our ancestors, Ukrainian genealogy program, which, as far as we know, is the only active Ukrainian genealogy group in the United States. You can go on our website and get the calendar of events, which are upcoming in-person and online events. The screenshot is a little dated. Some of these events have obviously already happened. Others, and there are new ones that have already shown up. So if you go there, you'll see a slightly different looking list. We also have a lot of folk arts programming for adults and kids. We started a very successful day camp program, and we're going to be starting a asynchronous learning seasonal subscription box. If you're interested in that, please let us know. And you can find that. You'll be able to find the details of that on our website as well. You can check out the stories from storage. So if you go under the stories tab here, these are like blog posts or video podcasts, and I'll be talking about one of them a little bit later today. We have rotating exhibitions. The one that is currently up is called Depicting Genocide, 20th Century Responses to the Holodomor. Those of you who are in the vicinity of New Jersey, I strongly urge you to come and view it in person. It'll be up through the beginning of the year. And if you can't, you can view it online. There is a full-scale online version of this exhibition as well. And obviously, this work cannot be done without your support. We do have a professional staff. We do have some grant funding. The exhibition was made possible in part by a grant from the New Jersey Council on the Humanities, and our arts programming is funded through these folks partially, but that only accounts for a fraction of our expenditures. So please support us if you can. So I will go ahead and launch right in, and later on, Anastasiia Chapman, who is the program officer for Supplemental Preferred Communities Programs, Team Ukraine, will be joining us. So about the 1940s, so the whole displaced person, which some of you may be familiar with, the whole displaced person era, is just way too much to cover even in an entire hour. If you're really interested in this topic, I really recommend this book. It's published by the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. I believe it is out of print, but you might be able to chase down a copy on the used book market or in a library. And just to give you an idea of the scope of this book, here's some not very good phone photos of the table of contents of this book. It is really quite wide ranging. Everything from politics to economics to psychology to repatriation campaigns to literary activities. It's quite. There was a lot that was going on in these camps during this period, and this book does a pretty good job of covering a lot of it. So, as the beginning of our intro to this event said, history doesn't really repeat itself. After all, if it did, then history would be predictable. And if anything from the past few years that we've learned is history is absolutely not predictable. However, as some wag has put it, and I don't know who said this, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And this is one case of that. So we have these two waves of refugees from Ukraine. One happened in the 1940s, starting in the mid-1940s, into the early 1950s. And then the other one is the wave that is currently happening right now. Both of those occurred out of a total population size of about 40 million. From what I've been able to tell, the population of Ukraine was roughly the same in 1940 and 2020 or 2022. According to the UNHCR, there's something like 6 million Ukrainian refugees around the world. That's a pretty astounding number. The numbers in the DP period were in the millions, if you consider all ethnic groups. But a lot of those ended up being repatriated, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But by the mid-1940s, there were about 250,000 Ukrainian displaced persons who were considered to be unrepatriatable, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Both of them occurred in the context of war, but in very different situations. Obviously, the refugee wave right now is happening in the middle of an active war. The DP wave of the 1940s basically occurred at the very tail end of that war, and basically were people who left because they basically had enough of Stalin or were fearful of persecution or things like that. The main entities that were responsible in that time period was something called UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. It was meant to be for short-range assistance until all refugees were repatriated. Well, it soon became clear that not everybody wanted to be repatriated. And so a whole new entity was formed called the International Refugee Organization, or IRO, or IRO, as it was sometimes known among the Ukrainians, which eventually the UNHCR was sort of a descendant of the IRO. So a lot of these refugees ended up in Germany. Some were in France, some were in Belgium, some were in Austria. The bulk of them were in Germany and Austria. I know you can't read anything on this map, but it is floating around on the internet, and you should be able to find it if you look for it. But this sort of gives you the location of all of the major and not so major displaced persons camps around Western Germany. What would become West Germany soon afterwards. A lot of these camps were in former German Army Wehrmacht barracks. So they were in former military facilities, and people literally lived in barracks. Some of them were in spectacularly beautiful locations. Like this is actually a view of the Mittenwald DP camp, nestled in the valley in the Bavarian Alps. So it was a really difficult life, but sometimes in really gorgeous scenery. So overall, in the introduction to that book, which I was pointing out, the authors sort of divide up this time period into sort of four major periods. The fourth one is after 1951, kind of the post-camp period. And they kind of, this period from like 45 to 51, they divide into three. The first part was from roughly 1945 into 1946, which they refer to as fear and chaos. And so this was the period where basically it was this literally this post-war chaos. Nobody knew what was happening. There were huge efforts by the Soviet Union to get their citizens back. The Soviet Union really wanted residents of the Soviet Union back under their control. And sometimes this was by trying to convince people that this is the workers' paradise. Sometimes it was by coercion. Sometimes it was downright by force. So there were very definitely instances of forcible repatriation. They did end up, there were already camps existing at this time period, but basically UNRWA really didn't have the boots on the ground to actually manage them. So the refugees kind of organized themselves. It was like this self-organization through elected camp committees that then reported to UNRWA. The second phase that kind of ran from 46 to 48 was what the authors of the book call normal life under abnormal circumstances. Basically, they created almost a parallel society. There was very little interaction between them and the Germans, the surrounding German population. But they tried to recreate what they knew in Ukraine. They created churches, they created church organizations, church administrative structures, both Catholic and Orthodox. They created theaters, schools, vocational training programs. They published books. Some of the younger people actually attended German universities. And because a fair number of the people were politically active, as sometimes as one historian has referred to it, it was a hothouse of nation building. They were kind of imagining, well, if Ukraine were to become free, what should it be like? And so there were massive political debates, etc. The third phase from like 48 to 51 was, as the authors call it, resettlement fever. This was when everybody was trying to get the heck out, settle somewhere, US, Canada, Australia, South America, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So what were these camps like? Well, there was very little privacy. There was very tough conditions. The artwork that's on the cover of that book is by Jacques Gnizdowski. This was actually a painting done by him actually in the DP camps. I believe it was painted in 1947. So this might have been from life, possibly. But you have sort of the whole range of people here. You have the family with little children. You have the grumpy guy soaking his feet. You have the intellectual up here with his books. And believe me, you had all of these in these camps. And the conditions were just bizarre. I mean, things that we take for granted were just not at all commonplace. There's a quote from a diary that we have in our collection, which I will read. So there was this man called Alexei Balabas, who was originally from Kuban, from Slavyansk na Kubani, not the Slavyansk in Donetsk. But he ended up in Prague, and then he ended up in Mittenwald. And this is a diary entry from the diaries that we have here. And so just to give you some context, he had been working with some guy named Roman Shtanko, who had written some memoirs of his experiences in the Soviet Union in the 1920s and 30s. And he was helping him to edit this book and to get the language cleaned up and stuff like that, get it into a more literary form. And then they were doing this readings, and they had done this reading from the book at this Večer Kombatantів, this evening of the combatants. And that was apparently extraordinarily successful, we read in one of the other diary entries. But this one is kind of quite amusing in that they were going to do another reading on January 25th, 48. But the reading did not take place due to the wonderful organization by the League of Political Prisoners, which put the reading on together with the Women's Association. The political prisoners didn't show up at all. and a total of 6 women were there by 7 p.m. But the main thing was that some gentleman arrived and declared that he had to immediately take away the light bulb, that because he had only loaned it until 7 p.m. He proceeded to unscrew it, and that was the end of the reading. So it's like, it's hard to imagine that like a light bulb would be a commodity that you could like loan. It's really hard to imagine what life would have been like in these places. Food was obviously rationed, unless you could get a doctor to give you a prescription for additional rations, which is what this is. So this is a guy named Yuri Perhorovich, who we will see some more later. And he got for an additional weekly ration of food per doctor's orders, with meat and cheese and sardines, dehydrated soup, eggs, flour, cereals, potatoes, and 3.5 loaves of bread. That's not bad. But if you were not lucky enough to get like doctor's orders, that would be, things would be considerably worse. And people would try to get, you can get like certifications in various professions, again, to try to get employment or to help with that. So for example, he ended up getting he completed car driver school under the United Nations, under UNRWA. And then he proceeded to get a bunch of other certifications for teacher of secondary school. And then as a beekeeper, he had actually been a beekeeper back home in Volyn. And in fact, he proceeded to actually write an entire like monograph on beekeeping. Korotkий kurs pasічництва, short course of apiculture, which was actually published in Ingolstadt in 1950. And this is one of the manuscript pages from that. And it says, work at the beehives, part 1, springtime. So then he goes through, he's like this whole dissertation on beekeeping. And then he would eventually take a course in and then get certified as an instructor for the laying of this synthetic flooring material called xylolith. I won't go into the details of what in the world that is, but so people did whatever they could to gain skills to help them get on with their lives. And of course, people did other things. So you had theater people, and they proceeded to actually put on theater productions. This is actually a program from the 1945-46 season of the ensemble of Ukrainian actors led by a major Ukrainian director named, I believe he was Vasil Blavatsky. And in this case, it's a production of Where the Lark Sings by Franz Lehar. You may have heard of him. He composed a number of famous operettas. But if you look on the back cover of this program, they had an insanely ambitious program. I mean, they were doing works, Western European works, like The Ghost Train by Arnold Ridley. They were doing farces by Arnold and Bach, who were very, very well-known comedic writers from Germany. They were doing Ukrainian works, Vasil Stefanik, Boris Rinchenko, Mykola Kulish. They were doing what was probably like a musical review, evening of rhythms and melodies. So it's really astounding what they were doing. So one key to this, obviously, was that there was relief aid. And this came a little bit later in this period. And in many cases, it was handled by charities. And one of them was the Church World Service. They kind of had gotten started not long before this. I believe, so in the paperwork that we have, Church World Service and World Council of Churches seems to be used interchangeably. I think one might have grown out of the other or something like that. Maybe Anastasiia might be able to clarify that. But then there were other organizations like the Lutherans, Catholics, and in case of the Ukrainians, there was something called the United Ukrainian American Relief Commission. It was really through the lobbying and through the work of the immigrants who had come earlier to the United States that a lot of this was able to happen. And it was on terms of their lobbying that this policy of only repatriation came to an end. So here you can actually see a letter from Church World Service addressed to slightly misspelled archbishop who was who was actually the secretary for the Synod of Bishops. He's Platon with one O, not platoon with two O's. So a lot of these materials you're going to be seeing are either from Platon's records as secretary of the Synod of Bishops, or of the records of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church in Germany. So, for example, here you have, this is from records that we have here at the UHEC. You have lists of people. This one happens to be from the St. Nicholas Orthodox Parish in the Falkenburg DP camp, and they have a list of people. They have their ages, and then you have what they need. So you have palto, coat, costume, like a suit or whatever, and then you even have their sizes. These are their clothes sizes. So men's clothes, women's clothes, children's clothes. You have something very similar. This is from the Pokrova parish in Heidenau in northern Germany. This would have been in the British zone. Very similar kind of thing. So clothes sizes. So these are, I guess, requests that were going in. I'm not sure whether or how they were fulfilled, but they did get things back. So, for example, this is 2 pages of. So this is now not request, but a receipt of material received. So this is in Ettlingen. It looks like. Yep. No. Sorry, this is Göttingen. Sorry, Göttingen. So it's G-O umlaut T-T, Göttingen. And so this is here. So here they call it Svitové Soyuz Cerkov, World Council of Churches, but this would have been Church World Service. And you have the person's name, what they received. So I'm trying to see here what that says. So this is like a package. This would have been like some sort of aid package. Flour, manka. Well, I guess that would have been like what's the word I'm looking for? Like porridge cereal. Sugar, shoes, and socks. And you have actually the signature of the person who received it. So they actually signed this piece of paper. These are the original signatures. And then on the bottom, you have the signature of the parish priest and of the commission who was handling the aid distribution. So there are literally folders full of these types of records here at the UHEC. Here's like a summary sheet that was done for World Council of Churches, Church World Service. From all the parishes and so this is a list of parishes, and then how many kilograms of flour was distributed, etc., how many pairs of shoes, how many pairs of socks, how many miscellaneous items. So it was a pretty complex arrangement. So then came resettlement. So this really began in earnest in 1948 when the Displaced Persons Act was passed in the U.S. And the U.S. actually accepted the bulk of refugees, of Ukrainian refugees, or actually, no, in general. So these are for all nationalities. Over 300,000 were accepted by the U.S., about 120,000 into Canada, about 180,000 into Australia, and so on. There was numerous South American countries, including Venezuela and Brazil and Argentina, accepted them. I believe, if I remember right, definitely Venezuela and Brazil. Preference was given to employable people. So these were people who were able-bodied, didn't have young kids, weren't old. Those who didn't fall into that category could potentially get in if they got like some sort of affidavit of support, which should sound very familiar to anybody applying for refugee status today. This is actually for Alexei Balabas, whose diary entry we read earlier. He ended up in Chicago. And then you had people looking to resettle. And so these are actually lists from Ettlingen in southern Germany. So you have the name of the person, you have their date of birth. I've redacted out the day and the month on the outside chance any of these people are actually still alive. And here you can see there's all farm worker, farm worker, farm worker, farm worker. And you can see this list was submitted, or I'm not sure because I don't really know German, but this is clearly says Church World Service here. The second list, which is actually from the same camp, but this is for intellektualistiv, for intellectuals. But if you look at the professions here, they're like accountants. They're like tocado. What's a tocado? I forget what that means, but he's more of a tradesperson rather than an intellectual. And interestingly enough, this was actually submitted through the United Ukrainian American Relief Committee, which is so it's kind of interesting that one went to one organization and the other one went to the other. Some of these people, like Yuri Perhorovich, the beekeeper guy, these are his USA orientation attendance records, which were handled by the YMCA, I believe. And so actually when Anastasiia visited here of back in the summer, she mentioned that apparently some of these terms are still used, like pipeline camp. So obviously he didn't do anything at the pipeline camp, but he was at the resettlement center and at the embarkation center. So those are all technical details, which I'm not sure we really have time to get into, but we can possibly discuss that later on. So then how is this, so I already mentioned that Ukrainians who were already here in the US were helping this. One of them was this United Ukrainian American Relief Committee, which you can see their letterhead right there. But another person, this is sort of a behind the scenes person, but he was a guy named Joseph Marmash. I believe he was born in the US. I'm sorry, I apologize, I don't remember. But he would have been a child of very early immigrants, like turn of the 20th century immigrants. And he ended up getting nominated to this thing called the Maryland State Commission for the Resettlement of Displaced Persons in Maryland. He was a resident of Baltimore, and the governor, that's the governor's signature, nominated him to this commission. It was a volunteer operation. And you can see here, here's a letter from Walter Galan, the head of the director of the UUARC. And you can see, this is the kind of stuff he was dealing with. So on January 15th, he's saying, oh, there's going to be 44 people arriving in Baltimore on the 17th, 2 days from now. Late at night, please arrange lodging for them. As you know, Governor Lane, this guy here, will be on the same train, and it would be very nice if the Ukrainian committee would be on hand to greet them. So, like, surprise. Meanwhile, Marmash has a full-time job. So he was really doing yeoman's work. Plus, he was handling all of this stuff. So here's a list of people that he was supposed to be picking up at the 5th Regiment Armory in Baltimore on Tuesday morning, February 22nd, 1949. And so you have a list of people. And as you can see, they're all, well, it might not be obvious, but they're all being resettled to farms. That's how Maryland did it. Everybody went to farms. It doesn't matter if you were like an accountant, you became a farmer if you ended up getting resettled in Maryland. Didn't have much of a choice. So this is actually quite a treasure trove here. This plus this index card file, which was also part of this collection, and that we actually have where they ended up. So if somebody was doing genealogy research, you could potentially figure out where your ancestors actually landed in Maryland. What farm were they on? And I wasn't kidding about these people who were not meant to be farmers who ended up on farms. So this is a letter that actually we discovered when Anastasiia was here. I'm not going to try to translate this entire letter, but this is from a guy named Alexander Zuzula. Turns out he is a published author. And what he's saying in his letter, this is a letter in 1949, basically to Joseph Marmash, where he misspells as Marmach. And he's basically saying, thank you, it's really good. I'm glad I'm here. I'm on this farm. But then he basically says, it's kind of weird because I've spent 39 years living in Kyiv, where for 15 years I worked as an editor, like for publication. So Izrazu живу в лісі, and all of a sudden I'm living in the middle of the woods. So he's like, this guy is definitely a city mouse, and all of a sudden he's like plopped on a farm. So it's actually kind of interesting, given that this is this guy actually has a Wikipedia entry on the Ukrainian Wikipedia. So it's really interesting to see these kinds of documents. And there are tons of these letters in the Marmash papers of people having problems, people either things are working out well or things are working out badly. The farmer isn't paying them. They're living in this decrepit building where the roof leaks and there's no windows. And he would go out on weekends and try to resolve these situations. It was pretty incredible that he did this kind of work, but he felt this obligation towards his fellow Ukrainians to help them out. There's another extraordinarily interesting story, which I won't have time to talk about here, but if you go on our Stories from Storage, look for this historical detective story and a remarkable story of survival. This is another letter that we found in the Marmash papers, and it's absolutely astounding that we were able to chase down who this person was. The short version of the story is, if you read the letter, it makes no sense. The timeline makes no sense. It seems completely impossible, but yet it was possible. And in fact, we managed to get a hold of the guy. I actually did a telephone interview with him, and he was able to explain, and this was like not long before he died. So we actually know the story behind this letter, and it is absolutely astounding, and I urge you to read this thing on our website. One last thing, just lest you think that all the Ukrainian displaced persons were in Europe, that ain't necessarily so. Here is another letter from the Marmash papers, written from some Vasily Volkov, a Russian immigrant IRO, to Babao Guian Samar PI. What is PI? Philippine Islands. He was in a DP camp in the Philippines. How in the world did he end up there? Well, he was from Poltavska, from the area of Poltava. My wife, Nadia Volkov, 34 years, born at China. So he was part of this migration that happened east instead of west after the revolution. We both need affidavit, but we have not relatives into USA. That why I bother you, sir. I stay at China since 1923 till 1949. I worked as detective of French Municipal Police, Shanghai, China. From 45 to 47, I worked as, I think that's supposed to be garden, but that's not what it looks like, keeper at the U.S. Army, and from 47 to 49 at British American Tobacco. He's now in Philippines. Would you be so kind, sir, as to do something for us, as we like to go to USA, but it is impossible without affidavit. So you can see all that's old is new again in some regards, but also just a reminder that people took very strange routes to get here. So that's all the slides that I have. And so I will now hand it off to Anastasiia, and she has some slides prepared about what she does, and then welcome to riff on that, on all of this.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I will show you a brief introduction of Church World Service and what we do now. And then I will make some connections with what they all just heard. So this is pretty amazing. When I heard about the Ukrainian History and Education Center at the Wilmington, North Carolina festival when we did, and Michael and his wife visited, and he said that they will have the Holodomor exhibit. And I was absolutely fascinated with the fact that there is a Ukrainian Heritage Museum, and I was very dedicated to visit it. And then amazing story come from there. So let me share my screen. All right. So our organization called Church World Service, short for CWS, and it is the refugee resettlement agency. Church World Service was founded in 1946. So you heard absolutely right that it was basically organized by 14 churches that got together and decided to help refugees to move after the World War II. The original mission, it was end hunger and promote peace and justice, and obviously it stands exactly the same right now. Right now, Church World Service not only helps Ukrainians, but also helps multiple different nationalities, and you can see it on this slide: Afghanistan, Central America, Colombia, Ukraine, Syria, and this is just to name a few. But I specifically work with Ukrainian refugees and in the Ukrainian program. So I will tell you more about Ukrainian program. Right now, they're not, Ukrainians who are coming to United States, they're not officially called refugees. And the reason behind that is refugees are the people who come here and stay here. Ukrainians called Ukrainian Humanitarian Police. It just means that they come here for the certain amount of time and they're expected to leave United States and go back home as of now. So here's the big difference of what you just heard about the 1940s and 1950s and the Church World Service back then, and what they offered and what it does right now. So before, you saw the connection that people were writing to Church World Service asking to assist them and bring them to United States. Right now, Church World Service does not do that. We only serve Ukrainians who already come here, and we're starting to help them as soon as they land, and then we can provide services for them. So as of right now, we cannot help anyone to come to United States. Again, very interesting that the even numbers are very similar to what you have just seen on the report from the 1940s. So as of right now, the goal set by the President Biden, it was 100,000 Ukrainians to be welcomed in the United States. So luckily, this number, they did not stop at that number. Right now, it's over 270,000 Ukrainians that entered United States. And the program that they're entering the United States through is U4U, United for Ukraine. They can still come through other, through the visas, through the Mexico border. So they're still accepting Ukrainians. So this number just expected to grow even more since the war is still going. Again, another similarity is, on the documents that we have seen from the 1940s, it was not only specifically Ukrainians, it was Ukrainians Polish people. There was even some papers that was pretty much stating Ukrainian/Polish. But the same right now, the program for we're able to assist not only Ukrainians with Ukrainian passport, but also any other people and any other nationalities who lived in Ukraine when the war started. And here's the most interesting part that I think you would definitely see the connection. And when we was talking with Michael during my visit, it was just how crazy similar the services that Church World Service provided in the late 1940s, early 1950s, in what we do now. And we definitely learn from mistakes, but also it's pretty much all the same. So the core services that we are supposed to provide is intensive case management. So that would be, right now they're paying case managers to assist our newcomers, but before it was a volunteer, like you just heard a minute ago. It was a volunteer who just really wanted to help Ukrainians, and he felt very passionate about helping them. So he was organizing the arrivals, assisting with the housing. He was looking for the jobs. He was trying to help them if there is any questions arise from the jobs and any problems. So this was pretty much the case manager, what we call it now, the Ukrainian case manager. But before it was just a volunteer who was doing exactly the same thing. So, we help right now with employment services. So we can help them with building a resume, applying for jobs, understanding the cultural norms around the employment, and also look for the job. Unfortunately, here's another similarity: is it's not always the job that is anyhow connected to the previous profession that they had or to education. It's most likely going to be the entry-level job unless they're really willing to look and, do the job themselves. But our idea and the idea that Church World Service has is to help them become self-sufficient as soon as possible. And unfortunately, that means, little money and more physical job, but little money better than no money. So the entry jobs is still, like you heard about farmers. Right now it's not farmers, but it's going to be housekeeping, it's going to be dishwasher, it's going to be the anything that you can think about the entry jobs. Education, and education is the big one, just like you saw on the paper that said cultural orientation, what people had to do before coming to Ukraine, from the camp to United States. Exactly same it is right now. The cultural orientation is not provided to Ukrainians before they come to United States, but when they arrive here and they contact CWS, we do help them sign up with the English language class and make sure that they learn English and become self-sufficient as soon as possible. We will connect them with potentially volunteers who would want to do the one-on-one training. We will help their kids to sign up for for school, and also in the rare occasions where the entry-level job, more physical job, is not the case. Like, for example, some trauma or some physical disabilities, and people cannot work in housekeeping, for example. So we can pay for them to go to and get some other some other diploma. It's not obviously not going to be bachelor and master's, but it's going to be some sort of a certificate where they will be able to do more of the computer job. But again, language is the number one. legal services, that's what we're helping them with right now to apply with TPS and asylum. Housing, as you saw in the late 1940s, it was you need to provide some stays, find the accommodations. That's exactly what we're doing now. If the person arrives here and they don't have anywhere to stay, they can come to CWS, and we will be able to pay for their short-term stay in the hotel, for example. It's crazy how pretty much nothing has changed from the 1940s and 1950s to this time. It's almost 100 years past, but it's all very similar. Here I will just go briefly about this. This is just the idea behind the CWS work. And I think the amazing thing that CWS have learned from the 1940s and how efficient it was to use Ukrainian-speaking volunteer at the time to communicate with the newcomers and with Ukrainians. So they're doing exactly the same. When we're hiring the Ukrainian case manager, always the preference would be to the Ukrainian-speaking person who can communicate. And very, very important that you heard about the example of the very educated gentleman who was resettled, and he lived at the farm, and he was saying how bored he was and how he was missing the community, that he is living in the woods. So CWS now make it a priority. Community building, it is a priority now. So they're investing a lot of money and a lot of time to actually care about people's mental health. And I think that is like the best thing that they could do, and the best thing that they learned in the last in the last 100 years, is that you not only need to provide people with the coats, shoes, and flour, but you also need to make sure that the person has the community around them, and they will be able to be mentally stable. And that is the key to become self-sufficient and be a good citizen for United States. So that is my short input on the resettlement of Ukrainian refugees in the United States. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions. And then if you have any friends or family who are accepting or waiting for the Ukrainian newcomers to arrive, or they already arrived, and you just heard some information that you think they would benefit from, I included the CWS offices map. You will be able to just click on the link and see if there is any offices next to you. And if you don't find any, feel free to email me or any of those offices and just ask about how, if there's any associates or anything like that, if there's other offices who will be able to help you. But yeah, that is it from me, and I will pass it back on.
Great, thank you. While you're on this topic, before I forget, sorry, Mike, I'm going to step on your prerogative here, but we have a number of people on the call here from Canada. And they're asking, can we contact, are there operations in Canada? Does CWS have operations in Canada, and how can they contact them if so?
So that's a great question. Let me do some research, because I work in United States, but I know that CWS offices are all over the world. There is offices in Asia, there is offices in Africa, so I can definitely check on that. And if you would send me an email, I would be very happy to check on it and then reply to you. Even if it's not going to be CWS, there might be other offices who provide exactly same services.
Yeah. Actually, if you could put your email address in the chat just to make sure that
Absolutely, yes, we'll do that.
people can access that. I also, before I hand it off to Mike, that is something that I kind of didn't emphasize very much in my talk. That's the other huge difference. One huge difference was the nature in terms of relative to the war, and the other one is that the 40s, they couldn't go back. They didn't want to go back. Whereas a lot of the refugees today, from at least from what I'm hearing, they do want to go back. That is when the war is over, they absolutely do want to go back. And so that's the other sort of this huge difference of these refugees versus parolees. Mike, is there anyone out there? I think I saw something.
Yeah, Michael, we have a comment from Stella Laurie, and she mentioned the fact that the book that you cited about Ukrainian refugees after World War II actually cost close to $200
on Amazon or something. Yeah, that sometimes happens. If it's a difficult,
it is a hardcover. Yeah, it is a hardcover.
It is a hardcover, and it's limited number, and there's probably not much. There's sort of, it's a small market.
I also noticed, though, that here in New Jersey, there's a copy at the Jersey City State University.
Yep.
And in New York City, there's a copy at Columbia University Library. So
yeah, you might be able to
local libraries to see if you can get
exactly it. Or through interlibrary loan or something like that. Our chat is disabled. Anyhow, well, yep. So Joyce just confirmed use interlibrary loan for books. Absolutely.
Right. And Barbara Bakowicz, weren't some refugees after World War II required to have a sponsor in order to enter the U.S.?
Mike, you might have as much knowledge about this as I do. I know that I don't know the details of this, frankly. It was my understanding, I think, so I showed you that one assurance of support for Oleksiy Balabas. So he was an older man at that point. He was already, I think, late middle age. And so he might not have fallen under the resettlement guidelines. And so in that case, he ended up getting an assurance from his son-in-law, actually. And that allowed him to enter.
Nina Sakun just replied to that, said, when my mother and I came to the U.S. in the 50s, we had to have a sponsor.
Yeah, so I think there might have been some categories where they were not required, but those were kind of more unusual. For example, one that I know, and this has to do with that mystery letter that I talked about, that's on our Stories from Storage page. That person actually ended up getting resettled as a war orphan because he was still under 18. I mean, he was just barely under 18, but he was under 18. So that's one group that was able to be resettled without sponsorship. There might have been some other categories if they were. So I guess the way it must have worked is, I guess the sponsorship would have been fairly easy to come by if you were young and able-bodied. I don't know, Mike. Do you have any insight into that? Because
I really don't, unfortunately. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I should learn more about that, because that's actually, I realize I don't know too much. Andrew Kohut.
Question here. We have Andrew Kohut.
Yes, our stalwart from Australia. Hi.
Do the displaced Ukrainians that recently arrived have the same desire to engage in Ukrainian life as the refugees did in the 1940s, or is there more of a desire to integrate and assimilate? It's a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
Well, I can take this question on, since till I've been working as a Ukrainian case manager for the last 10 months, and just recently took a different position. But absolutely, I would say, you can't say that every single Ukrainian that arrived in the 1940s wanted to participate. I think it's a very, I think it depends on the personality, but there is some Ukrainian refugees that arrive in right now. I cannot even tell you how much work they're doing to help Ukraine right now, to spread the culture. There is some most amazing human beings that I have met, and it is incredible how passionate they are about helping Ukraine. And just to imagine that what they went through, they were in the country with the active war. They fled the country, went through some crazy route to get here, and instead of just living their peaceful life and enjoying the clear sky, they're just doing so much work nonstop of organizing events, organizing protests, organizing festivals, putting the movies out in about Ukraine, connecting with people, talking about it constantly. So I would definitely say not every single one, and we can't blame them for it. You can't expect everyone in the world being so patriotic about their country, and like the first thing they want to do when they resettle is to trying to help. But the biggest majority of people who relocate, they're in one way or another, they really want to help. They're still, sending money back to Ukraine. They're fundraising for the army. They're talking about Ukraine all the time. They're trying to educate people on the problem. They're trying to make sure that the people don't forget about the war that's still going. So absolutely, I think the biggest part of the people who arrive, they are very active, and those who are not active, they're still supportive, they're showing up, but not all of us are activists, and not everyone is just ready to scream. So it's to be expected, but the vast majority are amazing.
I also think it's important to point out that the newcomers, the newer arrivals, are not necessarily out there joining the old type Ukrainian associations. I know from my own experience, I'm part of that first generation because my grandparents came here, and I'm active in the community in several groups. But I know the newcomers are in other groups. For example, in the New York metropolitan area, Razum is very active, and it's actually active throughout the US and in Ukraine. And I think some of the younger arrivals are becoming part of Razum rather than joining something like UKK or Ukrainian National Association. So it's, the community evolves. And I think, as you say, yes, people are very involved, but it may not be involved in the same way as they were in that first or second generation.
Yeah, the other thing I would mention is that the dynamics in the post-war period was also rather dramatically different, in that this connection to Ukraine was interrupted in a sense. They really couldn't communicate back. They might have even been afraid of communicating with their family for risk of endangering them. And plus there were communities that ended up getting built up here that were in some cases incredibly insular. So they weren't really integrating. I mean, some of them did integrate. Some of them, they obviously worked in the the U.S. landscape, the Canadian landscape. But in some cases, these communities were incredibly inward-looking, and it was like, we must preserve Ukrainian heritage because it's being destroyed over there in the Soviet Union. And so it was a very different situation. I saw Vsevolod, thank you for posting this. He said, people not coming through an organization, but were coming in individuals, and older people needed a sponsor. One side, I guess, of his family came through CWS with no sponsor. The other side came as individuals needed sponsors. So that's someone who has a personal connection to that period. We have someone with their hand raised. Christina, I don't know if you want to, I'm going to allow you to talk. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, Please go ahead.
I'm sorry that I came late because I had such a hard time getting in for some reason.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, my husband came as a child in 1941, so I was interested to try to tap into this. And I guess most of the Ukrainians coming now hopefully know that there's many communities that have Ukrainian association right in their city, depending on where they go, of course. But they're trying to help. We have some in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. So yeah.
It wasn't like that when my husband came as a little.
Yeah. No, there
his father was one of those, like you had an example of earlier, that was sent to a farm, and he had a PhD and taught at university, and he hated it.
Yep.
And he got out of that situation as fast as he could, but he never did get a better job. Oh, and one thing maybe I can add is that when I was in Philadelphia, like maybe, I don't know, 40 years ago or more, and the Nationalities Center at that time, and I think they still exist, I checked the other day, and there was when I went like 40 years ago as a volunteer to help people with English, there was a man who was a doctor, and he was being given vocabulary that would help him pass a doctor's exam on paper.
Yep.
So that he could still be a doctor.
Yep. I know personally some cases like that before the war of someone who was studying like crazy in order to pass the board exams. Okay, yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. Go ahead, Mike. If we have someone else. I see there are a few other things that came in, Mike.
We have from Martha Kelly. Why do you think that displaced persons didn't go home to Ukraine and their families after the war, I'm presuming World War II, rather than emigrating? My father was a DP and never shared that with us before passing.
Yeah, well, it was kind of impossible. I mean, it was political reasons, and I mean, if they would have gone home, they probably would have been branded a traitor or an enemy to the state, and possibly even shipped off to Siberia when they arrived. It was really not possible. That's again one major difference between now and then, is there was this very, very sharp break between, and in many cases your story is very similar. A lot of people did not want to talk about it with their kids, even if their experiences weren't that horrific. They just didn't want to talk about it.
And then we have a comment from Andrew Kohad. He says, thanks, like Mike Burek. I noticed the same here in Australia, the fact that the community is evolving, the organizations are evolving. And to Anastasia's point, the newcomers are incredible and very active in helping Ukraine.
Good. Glad the same thing is happening down under. Great.
Michael, I think we can take one last hand raise from Christina.
Oh, that we've already taken care of. Oh, is there a second one? Oh, Barbara. Yeah, there's a new one.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'll make it brief because I think you want to wrap it up. But in order to, in relation to what was just being discussed about why those who arrived after World War II did not want to return, as you said, a lot of them could not for many reasons, but the majority of reasons, just as it was for my dad and his cohorts who came from Western Ukraine, from Ternopilsko Oblast, Berezhany, Lviv, they were involved, some of them, in partisan activities. And then there would be those who did not want to return because, as you said, Michael, there was that danger of being arrested and being sent off to Siberia, because a lot of members of my dad's family and people within that region were sent off to Siberia. And there was no communication under Stalin until Khrushchev came into power and things started to lighten up. But until then, there was no communication. It was truly an iron curtain, literally and figuratively, where no one knew who lived, who survived, who died, who came back from Siberia, who didn't, and so on. So those people, and my dad talked a lot about what he saw and what he lived through during those years. But as you said, there were those who did not want to talk about a lot of that at all.
Yep. Yeah, no, that was another whole category of refugee that I didn't mention. Yeah, there were definitely those, and they and their families would have been it would have been like practically a death sentence if they would have gone back.
Yeah, I mean, when we wrote letters, you'd write in code once you were allowed to write letters. Yeah, you had to write secretly in several ways. But anyway, thank you for letting me speak.
Sure, absolutely.
Michael, I think it's about time to wrap up.
Yep, we can. Well, we have a second person from Australia. Thank you, Greg. Big difference between Ukrainians from Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. Yes, there were at that time. That could be the subject of an entire hour-long presentation. But yes, so there were similarities, but there were some pretty substantial differences at that time, and maybe we should actually do a Nashi Podetsky program on that at some point. So Nina, thank you for mentioning that. Wouldn't they be labeled traitors even if they were German prisoners? Absolutely, yes. Yes, there were cases where returning POWs, returning to the Soviet Union, would end up getting, instead of being welcomed home, would end up being shot or sent to Siberia. Yep, some other comments about the Ukrainian communities. That's fantastic. We don't have time to deal with those, to talk about those. Don't think I'm sort of clicking those through so that you can see them. Yeah, so if there's no other questions, we did run a little bit late, but not as late as the program we ran a couple of weeks ago. So this is still pretty good, and I'm glad there's plenty of people still here. Oops, somebody just raised their hand. Olga Kobrin, do you want to talk? Our friend.
Yes, it's Olga Kobrin. Thank you. Do I have a few minutes or not?
Sure, go ahead.
I wanted to speak about Joseph Marmash. I come from Baltimore. I was born and raised in Baltimore, and my father was an immigrant to America in his early 20s. He must have come around 18, 19, something like that. And his sisters all immigrated to America, to Baltimore, as a matter of fact, in the late 1800s, like Joseph Marmash's parents would have. And of course, they created a community and organizations and so on and so forth. And I grew up with the young immigrants that came after the Second World War. They were all my friends. We grew up together. And both we called them the old immigrants, like Michael spoke about his grandfather. It was my father and my aunts and their children who were the old immigrants along with me. And then the new immigrants came after the Second World War. We all understood even before they came that life in Ukraine was obviously terrible, and that we were losing our country to communism, because everybody understands that situation. And everything we did in our cultural life within the Ukrainian community and within the Baltimore community was to inform people, to teach people, to educate, no matter where and what, pisanke, embroidery, cooking. We had an I Am an American Day parade in Baltimore. All the different cultures were part of that parade, and Ukrainian pride and education. You know, we all tried educating people. Even in school, we didn't learn about what was going on in the Soviet Union. Each of us spoke up and spoke about what was going on in Ukraine. We would dance have Ukrainian dancing on stage in our high school. The group of us Ukrainians would do that. It was just, our life was always informing and educating those around us of what's going on, so that no one would forget that there is a Ukraine and that we're being subjugated. And then, of course, the new immigrants came and they brought new life to our Ukrainian community, and just energized it. So we're hoping that these new immigrants, that they also energize our communities now in this new wave of immigrants who are not immigrants, but they are refugees and suffering and have lost so much.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Anastasiia.
I just wanted to add to this because I think you just had an amazing and very important point. I was telling just before this presentation started about it wasn't a webinar, it was more of a brief presentation from the Professor Coe in Chapel Hill just about a week and a half ago that I attended. And he's one of the legal advisors of United States, and he's helping right now in the international court to bring justice. He's on the Ukraine side team trying to put Russian leaders in prison, pretty much. But when someone in the after the presentation asked him why you're doing it, because he's not Ukrainian, he's I believe Korean. I don't want to make the I don't remember for sure, but they asked why are you doing it, why are you on the spending your life right now when you have so much other things to do and you're on the legal team to protect Ukraine. His answer was, and I think this is very remarkable, is when he was a 6-year-old boy, there was just 3 immigrant kids in his class when he moved to United States. One was him, and the second one was the Ukrainian boy. And this 6-year-old Ukrainian boy kept bringing him pisanki for Velykdень, for Easter, and his family kept inviting the Professor Koi's family to his home, and it was all decorated in Ukrainian art, and they were always very nice. They were always telling him about Ukrainian history. So now I cannot assume, but I think in his 60s, fighting for Ukraine when he's a professor. So you see the influence on the person when he was 6 years old, and that little Ukrainian boy made such a huge impact on his life that now the person chooses to protect Ukraine. So I think what you have told, it is extremely important, and I think exactly that Ukrainian refugees doing right now, because when I arrived to United States 9 years ago, I have not seen any Ukrainian festivals or Ukrainian movies being shown here or people speaking about Ukraine. But now it's another wave of new people coming, very active, very nice, and they just keep telling about cultures, and that's all we can do, or most we can do, is just keep sharing the culture, being nice, and unite in that way.
Yeah, I should also, I would be neglectful to mention Olga Kobyrin is a good friend of ours. She's done presentations in our folk art programming, so she's a fantastic person. I will be in touch with you, Olga, by the way. Joseph Marmush's daughter is alive and well, and I was just in touch with her. So I can get you in touch with her. Anyway.
Yes, I don't know her, but I certainly remember her father.
Okay, very good.
Quite a leader in our community. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's one other person with her hand raised. I'm going to go ahead, even though it's a little late, but this is Christina. I'm attempting to unmute you or allow you to unmute yourself. Oops, sorry. I just muted you by mistake. I'm sorry. Try that again.
There. Okay. That was lovely what I just heard. So I'll try to be short and not distract. But we have a lot of Ukrainians who came to the Phoenix area that speak Russian. Yeah. And so just be aware that, you know, we had Ukrainians here who didn't even allow Russian to be spoken at the podium in the Ukrainian hall. Yeah. And now all of a sudden we have people who don't know you. Well, they maybe know Ukrainian, but they prefer to speak in Russian. And they're also just as pro-Ukrainian as the rest of the Ukrainians that are here.
Oh, absolutely.
And they've been collecting and donating and, you know, taking stuff over there and everything.
That could be another presentation as well. A very similar dynamic happened in the late 40s and 50s. Exactly the same thing.
Interesting.
Exactly the same thing. So you had people from Central and Eastern Ukraine who came speaking either Surzhyk, or it was clear that it was not like standard Ukrainian, and they were in many cases not accepted by the Ukrainian community because, oh, you're Russian, go to the Russians.
Right. So, my husband was from Kharkiv, and he first learned Russian, but as soon as they found out they had to go across as not being from the east part of Ukraine, he switched to Ukrainian and didn't dare open his mouth in Russian.
Yeah. So it's
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. The parallels are sometimes very interesting. Okay, so in the interest of time, I see you have your hand raised, but I think in the interest of time, we will wrap it up. I apologize for cutting you off there, but we will. You can. I think this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much, Anastasiia, for joining us here, getting the perspective on the current situation in respect to the history, and thank you all for attending. Been very much an international crowd, and we look forward to seeing you in the future at a future UHEC event. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.